Coming up on One Detroit, we're at the Detroit Policy Conference. The focus on Detroit in 2020 and beyond. Where do we stand as a region? You'll hear from Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, and Nolan and Stephen will join me. One Detroit at the Motor City Casino Hotel is coming up.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, Craft-Made in Maryland cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV. The Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, Business Leaders for Michigan, and by
the DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Also brought to you by Ally, NISSAN Foundation, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi there and welcome to One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald. We are at the Motor City Casino Hotel for the Detroit Policy Conference. It's a one-day event that the Detroit Regional Chamber puts on every year, concentrating on the biggest issues facing the city and the region. Nolan and Stephen will join me in a few minutes. We'll hear from Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan and talk state of the state and Governor Gretchen Whitmer taking the national stage for the Democrats after the State of the Union. But it has been a heck of a decade in Detroit. Take a look. From bankruptcy to big investment, Detroit in 2020 has a lot going on. Announcements that Ford is investing in the old train station, the new bridge to Canada under construction, GM to transform the Hamtramck plant into an electric car manufacturing center, and FCA with the new Jefferson North Assembly plant. In the past 10 years, new restaurants have opened quickly, and shops fill storefronts along Woodward and downtown. There's new housing in Midtown, investment in skilled trades programs, a lower unemployment rate. But serious issues remain. The population isn't growing. Education in city schools is slow to improve. The poverty level, while dropping, is still higher than in other big cities. Detroit has more renters than homeowners, and the city is still straightening out its system of assessing property taxes, while the list of blighted properties to be demoed grows. Reliable transit still elusive in the city and connecting through the suburbs, and many residents look to investment in their neighborhoods, public safety, and help for small businesses to thrive. We are just a few weeks away from the state of the city, and Mayor Mike Duggan did a one-on-one interview here with Conference Chair Dennis Archer Jr. talking about where things stand in the city right now.
The General Motors announcement is still breaking news.
Well, when General Motors announced in November of 2018 they were closing down the Poletown plant and all that meant to Detroiters, and they hadn't given me any advance notice, I was pretty upset. My question is, could you make what they call DHAM the site of the future? And at one point in her career, Mary Baruah was actually the plant manager at the Detroit Hamtramck plant. This was not something she was doing lightly. And so over the coming days, we had a number of conversations. Mark Royce, her right hand, who's just a through and through Detroiter, they started to develop this plan. You think about what they're doing. You're talking about a plant that was built for gasoline-powered cars. To do trucks is a huge investment. To convert to all-electric vehicles, it's a $2.2 billion investment. It's building an entirely new plant. The magnitude of the change is breathtaking. They're going to make these Cruise Origins. If you haven't seen the video, go online. But basically, these are vehicles that are going to be self-driving vehicles that will be the cabs of the future. And they're going to start running the service in San Francisco even this year. It's going to be all electric trucks and SUVs. GM absolutely believes the future, and so does Ford, and so does Waymo and a number of others, that will be no gas emissions, no accidents, because you can do this. And I'm just really pleased with the fact that they changed course and they made the investment here.
We often talk about inclusive development and being inclusive in these opportunities. And a lot of times when we talk about that, we're talking about jobs. But equally as important is a path to ownership and entrepreneurship. And just because it's my neighborhood, I see what's happening now on Livernois.
Yeah.
So now we're going from a big $2 billion industrial investment to small business in the neighborhoods. So talk about the redevelopment of Livernois.
Ordinarily, you don't start out as an entrepreneur writing high rent checks in downtown and midtown. And in the neighborhoods, folks don't want to go to downtown and midtown for their services. If you're out in that northwest area where I used to live, you basically go to the suburbs. And so we had this idea. Livernois had an enormously rich tradition as the avenue of fashion.
That's right.
For many years. And over the years, that slipped badly. But we said, what if we brought it back? But this is what we do. If, as a community, you do it in a respectful way. You go into the neighborhoods, talk to the business owners, talk to the neighbors, and let them talk to each other as a group. And then we put $17 million into that streetscape. I had to take a lot of grief in the short term, but I think when you see what happens, this is the kind of city we're trying to build.
Can you talk about and just reiterate the importance of the census and what we can do as members of the community to help you get this done?
Well, in 2010, of course, the city was going through some turmoil and not much effort was put in. And DTE, which shows me what the utility hookups are every day, thinks the city was probably undercounted by 30,000 people. That probably cost us $300 million in services, everything from money for school lunch to Medicaid to development programs and the like. And the minority undercount is very real. People of color are more distrustful of why the government is asking who's in their house and what do they make than Caucasians. That's just the truth, which means that our community has to have that much more effort, but you need trusted voices. And across the city, in a number of the ethnic areas and the like, whether it's the Bangladeshi community, the Latino community, the Yemeni community, it's been absolutely terrific to see everybody come together. And the thing that we're emphasizing over and over is, under federal law, the Census Bureau cannot disclose any details of your census application for 70 years. They can't give them to the IRS, they can't give them to ICE, they can't give them to local government, they can't give them to your car insurance company. And so we're saying to everybody, and the apartments landlords are all hosting meetings to say this, fill it out honestly. And where you sleep at night April 1st, don't be afraid to say, I'm a Detroiter, it'll count for the next 10 years.
You mentioned something in the back that there's 2 times in the last 50 years did we have a Democrat in Lansing and in D.C. Talk about the importance of the upcoming election and what that sort of alignment would mean for the city.
The 2 years was the 2 years of Granholm and 2 years of Obama, 2009, 2010, which in this city was a traumatic time in what was going on. And so you have not had a time in this city in 50 years where a mayor could sit with a Democratic president and a Democratic governor and really be able to lay out what is an urban agenda with Lansing, Washington, and the like lined up. So obviously, I'm campaigning hard for Joe Biden, but if we can get that alignment, the next term as mayor could be an historic time.
For more on where the city stands, let's bring in our One Detroit contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of American Black Journal. Hey guys, it's good to see you.
Good to be here.
All right, Detroit in 2020. Go, Nolan.
Well, I feel like, you know, Detroit, through this decade-long resurgence, if you will, has benefited from a good, strong economy nationally and a growing economy in Michigan. The question you always have about Detroit is, can it withstand a downturn? And you got to believe there's a downturn coming somewhere. You don't want to be a prophet of doom, but it's only natural to think we're going to have a slump in the economy at some point, whether it's because of a virus or because, you know, the national economy dips. Have we reached a point where we can sustain? where we can get through a bad stretch. That hasn't been tested yet.
It's sustained, but still get some crucial things done that need to be done, though.
Yeah, well, so I went back and looked at a piece that I wrote in 2009 about Detroit in 2020. So I kind of predicting some of the things that we would have and would be dealing with. And there's some really interesting things on there that have come true, and there's other stuff that hasn't. One of the ones that didn't is the bridge, right? In 2009, we were talking about the second span across the Detroit River. The piece I wrote presumed that would be built in the middle of the decade. We aren't even, they're pouring footings and stuff, but we're not that close to that. It talked about also, though, neighborhoods and how neighborhoods needed to be part of the equation when we talk about revitalization. And we've turned to that in the last few years, but it's slower than I think you would have predicted 10 years ago that things would happen. I mean, there's great stuff happening in lots of places, but there are still lots of neighborhoods that are just really struggling.
It's a different dynamic with the neighborhoods. I mean, in downtown, there was a lot of pent-up demand for a downtown experience, for an urban experience. The demand for the neighborhoods still lagging. I mean, you're not getting a huge infusion of people into this region, new residents into this region, and you're not seeing a whole lot of people leaving the suburbs to go to Detroit neighborhoods. The trade-off, the value proposition, still not all that great.
And you also have a lot more and a lot different things that go into that. It's not just one problem to solve. You're looking at public safety. You're looking at property tax assessment. The Detroit News just did, a huge storyline on taking a look at that, and people being able to stay in their homes. That's all part of neighborhood success. And then you talk about schools. So there's still a lot of different facets when we talk about neighborhoods that goes into the success of neighborhoods.
Yeah, you're talking about people and human capital that is undervalued and underinvested in our city. And that's the hardest thing to move. It's the hardest needle to move from negative to positive because it takes a lot of time. It is more costly than some of the other things that we've done, and there aren't push button answers to a lot of the problems, right? I mean, there aren't businesses. If there aren't businesses downtown, the answer is to attract some businesses and open some things. And Dan Gilbert went and did that. It wasn't that difficult. Investing in people who have been underinvested for generations and moving them along to opportunity and changing the environment that they live in so that opportunity can take seat. That's really different.
But I think what you need to see is a stabilization. I'm not sure we've hit that yet. We need people
We're still dropping
to
down in some places.
Stay in the neighborhoods as they move up the economic ladder.
Right.
We haven't seen that in Detroit. People move up the economic ladder, whether they're white or black, and they move out.
Go.
And I think you're starting to see people stay in some of the neighborhoods, some of the better neighborhoods. But again, unless you get growth, it's hard to imagine you're going to get people leaving suburban neighborhoods to move into Detroit neighborhoods the way you've seen people leave the suburbs to come to downtown Detroit.
So let's
it's
talk
a
a little
different
bit
dynamic.
about growth, and we're going to be able to do the census in 2020. And so what will those numbers really tell us, Nolan, and what kind of impact will that have?
Well, I think they're going to be better than past census numbers. And, Mayor Duggan's speaking today. Like every other mayor I've ever heard since I've worked here, we got to get a big census count. We got to make sure we count everybody. And a lot of things work against that. There's still a lot of transient population in the city, a lot of mistrustful people in terms of giving the government their information. It's always important, and we always fall just a little bit short of where we want to be at the end.
Yeah, I'm worried about the census, frankly. I'm worried about what the number actually is. I think it's smaller than we think that it is going to be, and I'm worried about making sure that everybody gets counted. I think there are a lot of people who feel either like there is no point in filling out the census, or that there is a negative consequence that's possible if you do it. I have heard specifically from people who say, I'm worried about immigration reactions to the census. I'm worried about child support, those kind of things. These kind of rumors take hold and they spread like wildfire in cities like Detroit, and you have to push back against it. We're doing a lot of things, I think, to do that.
Yeah,
but
there's a lot of big information campaigns that are,
but
that are
I
trying
really
to roll
worry
out.
that it's not going to be enough and that our count is going to be low.
Well, the one thing the mayor talked about in terms of the census was he says 60% of the people living in these downtown apartment buildings don't claim Detroit as their residence. And, they don't need to do that on the census. They just have to say, we live here.
I live here. Yeah.
All right, well, there's a couple of other things that I think we're going to be tackling in Detroit and the region in the next 5 to 10 years. And I spoke with Detroit Regional Chamber CEO Sandy Baruah about the state of investment in the city and specific policy issues that we as a region really need to concentrate on. So we look at Detroit in 2020 and we kind of look at where we need to go in the next 10 years, and the Detroit Regional Chamber just had kind of a state of the region report come out. What are you seeing in terms of maybe specific policy initiatives or some different things we need to start to focus on to get Detroit in the region to the places that we want to be now in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, Christy, you have just crystallized the entire question that this conference is really focused on. We had this tremendous decade that just passed, right? Look at what's happened to the region and the state. It's been tremendous. How do we make that same kind of progress over the next decade? And I think we have to solve some fundamental problems. We have to solve a transit problem. We have to solve an education problem. We have to solve a opportunity for all problem, because we're seeing great success in some parts of our communities. Other parts of our communities, we haven't made the progress we need to make. So we have some fundamental challenges before us that we have to solve before we can have another great decade.
Okay, but those aren't easy challenges to solve, and it's going to take policy, it's going to take money. So where are we seeing in terms of funding, and where are we seeing in terms of threshold for pain for policymakers in Lansing to be able to start to change things?
Well, first of all, it's news to me that it's going to be hard. I was hoping we could solve these things by next Tuesday, but okay,
I like
fine.
to point those things out.
So, number one is that communities and regions need to look within themselves first and start solving the problems they can internally. One of the things that we can do here in the Detroit region is start solving this transit problem. We can do a better job of making our communities more welcoming, more friendly to millennials and people from outside the region to move in here. Those are things that we can do internally. Yes, we need to look to Lansing. In some cases, we need to even look to Washington, D.C., but let's start where we have an impact first before we start looking to others to help us.
All right, so let's talk about education, though, which is another specific, I think, policy challenge that we have in terms of what kind of funding, how we break up that funding for different districts, and what we're concentrating on as a whole in education. Where do you see some of the change that needs to be made?
So there's a couple things. Of course, there's a statewide coalition called Launch Michigan, which I'm proud to serve on the steering committee for. And one of the fundamental things that we have said at the outset is that we need to ensure that there's not equal funding, but equity funding. And that really acknowledges that different students coming from different backgrounds in different places need a different level of funding. Because a student coming out of my school district in Grosse Pointe has a different set of advantages and has a different set of needs than someone coming out of another neighborhood. And until we fix that disparity gap, we're still going to have a social mobility problem, because we need people who are in underserved communities, those children, to have the same opportunities of students coming out of a wealthier district.
So it seems like that same drumbeat of education, because what are companies telling you when they're looking at Michigan, or specifically Southeast Michigan, to either invest in, to move a company to?
Yeah.
Is that still a sticking point in terms of what our education averages are, test scores, or the amount of people that have a college education or that talent and workforce that's available here?
Yeah, so what businesses are telling us that there's a war for talent, and talent won, right? Companies are losing the battle for talent every day. And it doesn't matter what kind of business. They're losing the war for talent because the available talent pool, people with the right 4-year degree or the right 2-year associate's degree or the right skilled certificate, right? You don't have to have a 4-year degree to be successful today and tomorrow, but you need some sort of advanced training, and that needs to continue. Companies don't have the pool out there to draw from. And the region with the best talent is going to win this war. Because if our companies don't have the access to talent that they need to succeed today and tomorrow, they're going to start moving operations to other parts of the country or the world that have that talent base.
All right, well, we can't wait to see what's next, and we'll see you up at Mackinac, of course, Sandy.
Great, thanks, Christy.
Thanks. All right, back here with Nolan and Stephen. Let's widen the view statewide. Governor Whitmer is not here at the policy conference this year because she's getting ready for her State of the State address, which is happening tonight. So we're recording one day early. She's also getting a lot of national attention. She's going to be giving the Democratic rebuttal after the presidential State of the Union in February, which I think is a very interesting thing that we can talk to. Let's talk a little bit about State of the State. Obviously, roads on the agenda yet again for this year. And now I feel like we're hearing a couple of different ideas circulating around about how we're going to be able to do this, Nolan.
Well, I don't see how the challenge is any easier this year than last year. In fact, I think it's harder. Last year was the year to do it. 2020's election year. You've got all these House members who are going to be facing election in November, both Republican and Democrat. And you know, we haven't built enough public support yet for the idea of raising revenue for roads.
But people say that this is the most important issue to them, is
and they
fixing
also
the roads.
said, the Detroit News ran the Chambers poll from last week. 30% of people, it's their top priority. It's the highest ranked priority in Michigan, but over half of people believe we already got enough money to do the work.
Okay, but we don't have $2 billion lying around, correct, to do the work?
We don't have $2 billion lying around, and you know, that number gets worse as you fail to come up with it each year. You are letting more and more roads reach worse and worse condition. In a few years, it could be $2.5 billion, right? I mean,
But
the
reality
urgency.
is you're not going to be. It's going to be hard to get $2 billion of work done in a year anyway.
It would,
but
yeah.
you know, but we do need some amount of money. Now, this idea of bonding for it, I think that has some appeal
like that idea.
short term for a couple of years.
Yeah, I don't like that
While
idea.
we try to figure out the right mix for
That is
raising
not
revenue.
something.
What the people will
It's not
support.
something you borrow for because
No,
it's not permanent infrastructure,
it's not
right?
ideal. You
It's
gotta
maintenance you're talking
You got to
about.
keep the bond short term,
Yeah,
and you can only do it for a couple
I think
of
that's
years.
really irresponsible. I get that.
I don't disagree.
Yeah, I get that we don't have a lot of other choices, but we've got to start talking about other ways to raise that money because people are not going to vote for new taxes,
No,
I think.
right.
They might, though. This idea about raising much of the money through municipal tax issues, I think, you know, they have had some success.
Yeah.
When communities have gone to their voters and said, we need a tax to fix your local
Your
roads.
road right there.
And that's a lot of the problem.
But the
is
problem
right
with
there
that is the
on those local
unevenness
roads.
in municipal finances. There's going to be a lot of places that's not as possible as it
That's
is
right.
others.
It's
So now you're
true.
going to leave rural communities and other poor communities
Well,
behind. I don't
The
love
rural
that either.
communities have been getting
Well, they get
a disproportionate
their- yeah,
share
right,
anyway.
out
So
of, Act
the idea
51.
of fixing Act 51 to better distribute the
Yeah.
money, I think that's going to happen.
Okay, really interesting that the Senate is now commissioning a study to the tune of $150,000. That might not go over very well for people to say, wait a minute, what about some toll roads here
Yeah.
in Michigan, which has always been a non-starter because we are not a drive-through
Well,
state.
that's actually not so. We are not the same kind of drive-through state that Ohio or Pennsylvania is, but Chad Livengood, who wrote the story about this 2 weeks ago for Cranes, showed how much traffic actually comes through here. You talk about the Toronto to Chicago corridor for trucks. There's no other way to get there other than through Michigan. There's also traffic from the south that comes up into Canada through Michigan. There are some places where you could do discrete tolling
At the border?
to catch that traffic. You can also do local tolling. I mean, if you go to Chicago into the suburbs and drive around on the freeways, you pay tolls on all of those places to get wherever it is you're going, work or school or home, and nobody thinks anything of it. And that's what pays for those roads. We don't have a culture of doing that here.
No, and we're not gonna
But there's
develop
no
one.
reason that we can't consider that
Explore it.
along other.
I
among
think
other
tolls
things.
might work in certain places, and different
Well, they
states
couldn't do it
different.
everywhere.
But tolls in an urban area where you're jumping on one freeway onto another freeway.
Well, nobody
I
has
think
tolls in
that's-
urban areas.
I think that's onerous. Well, you just said Chicago.
Well,
I mean,
suburban Chicago.
I think
Right.
that's onerous because you think of the number of times a day you're on a different
Yeah.
freeway. But
Well, they're
but
gonna
there's-
study it.
Yeah,
Here's
they're
the other
gonna
thing
study
about
it, and it
tolls
may work
that-
in some places.
But here's the other thing about tolls that people don't understand is that when you say toll, people think of the little booth with the gate and the ticket and the person and the thing.
No.
It
It's
doesn't
like
work
Easy
that way
Pass.
anymore.
I mean,
You just drive
yeah.
through a thing. It calculates
But
your
you still
your
need
cost.
the booths and the gates because not everybody. If you're going to, particularly if you're going to get the pass through,
if you have the
traffic, people
pass,
from other
but
states.
you don't. I mean,
But people
But you still
traveling
pay
from
it,
other
I mean-
states won't have the pass, so you still need infrastructure.
Well, let's.
well, that's true, right?
All right, seeing as we're not going to solve roads right now, before in the time that we have left, Governor Whitmer tapped to give the Democratic rebuttal after the State of the Union. What does that mean to you, Nolan?
Well, I mean, I think we should be proud as a state. I don't know. I mean, it seems a little early to be spotlighting her. You know, she's 1 year in, hasn't got much done yet. But you know, she is an example of a woman who beat a Republican to take the office, and that's sort of what Democrats are touting this year.
Yeah, powerful
This is
voice.
about 2018 and 2020.
Right.
It is about reminding voters, Democratic voters, of what happened just 2 years ago, and hoping that they get excited in the same way for this November.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks, guys. And that's going to do it for One Detroit from the Detroit Policy Conference. Thanks so much for watching. We will see you back here next Thursday. Take care. You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Maryland cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV. The Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund. Business Leaders for Michigan. And by
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
also brought to you by Ally, NISSAN Foundation, and viewers like you. Thank you.